Thank you for joining us tonight. Terrible news today in Palestine, where it's called the Flower Massacre. Over 100 people were shot down by the IDF, of people who were waiting for food and an aid transport to arrive, with reports that over 700 injured. Horrific, probably possibly the worst day so far in what is looking like it will get worse before it can get any better. Tonight, we want to discuss solutions to the conflict. You know, that's.
I want just to add that there was a rally.
Sorry, Conrad. I'm going to start finishing a few introduction remarks, and then we have some people from the platform can speak, and then I'll bring in people from the floor. Sorry to cut you off, Adam. That we have to stick to a little to our timetable. So we've got 3 main speakers and an additional speakers. We have put this meeting together to look at the different proposals that are being made across the left. So it's a very complicated situation, reflected in the fact that we have on the platform people who've worked on this issue for many, many years, and yet there are different ways forward proposed. Very important to discuss these issues out and not just say one of these views is, you cannot be discussed, this is out of pale, etc. So it's important that we discuss all of them. We're going to start with Tony Greenstein, who's got a one-state solution. We've got then Adam Keller from Israel, Shush Shalom peace organization, to talk about 2 states. We have Moshe Machover, who's got a regional socialist solution, and Steve Freeman, who is arguing for a federal republic, binational republic in the Middle East. So we're starting with Tony. Everybody's got 15 minutes, the 3 main speakers. Steve will have to do with 10. And then we're opening up for comments and contributions from the floor. So over to you, Tony.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, all good.
Right, okay, thank you. Yes, today we have heard news of yet another massacre. I don't know which is worse, the bombing of Al-Ahli Hospital or the starvation, death by hunger, as Hans Frank, the Nazi governor of Poland, called it when laying siege to the Jewish ghettos. But it's immaterial in a sense. I agree with Ilan Pape that what we are seeing is the beginning of the end of Zionism in all its glory. It's gone from ethnic cleansing to genocide and extermination, indeed. And Gaza today is really a death camp. I want to say, firstly, this is not a national conflict. It's not a conflict between 2 peoples. I mean, the left Zionist position is there are 2 rights, but there certainly aren't, in my opinion. It's a settler colonial conflict, and I think that's quite clear. The Zionists were European settler colonials who used the myths of biblical settlement and the 2 Jewish states as the pretext for carrying out their program. And incidentally, I think it should also be emphasized that Zionism was never a Jewish idea. Zionism arose with the Christians, Christian evangelicalism, and even before that, Christian dispensationalism, going back to Cromwell, and various Christian imperialists, whether it was Cromwell or Napoleon, Palmerston, Lord Shaftesbury, the Romantic novelist George Eliot. They were all in favor of Zionism before the Jews. I mean, Jewish Zionism was relatively late on the scene as a reaction to the pogroms in Eastern Europe, and in particular in Odessa in 1881. Now, I think it needs to also be said that when Zionism, which had been searching for an imperial partner, when Herzl traveled around the royal houses and the imperialist rulers, German Kaiser and so on, in his sojourns, the Jewish people were always opposed to Zionism. the very first Zionist Congress was supposed to be held in Munich in South Germany, but the Jewish community of that city rose up in protest and demanded that it be transferred, it not be held. And in the end, it was held in Basel in Switzerland. Likewise, with the Balfour Declaration, the agreement between the Zionist movement and British imperialism, presided over by Arthur Balfour, a Christian Zionist, an anti-Semite, who had first earned his spurs in Ireland, where he was known as Bloody Balfour after the Mitchelstown shooting of demonstrators in the 1880s. The only Jewish member of the Lloyd George War cabinet to oppose the Balfour Declaration was Sir Edwin Montagu, who later became Secretary of State for India. And Zionism was adopted despite the attitude of Jews in this country. And indeed, the Jewish bourgeoisie only reluctantly came over to Zionism when they saw it as their patriotic duty. So no one should believe the chief rabbi or others of his ilk who assert that Zionism and Judaism have been intertwined for 2,000 years and you can't oppose one without the other. That is absolute nonsense. And Zionism, the slogan which sums up Zionism is a land without a people for a people without a land. In other words, there was no people there. They were invisible. The indigenous population, like in so many other colonial situations, did not exist. Terra nullius in Australia, an empty land, similarly in what became the United States. So there was nothing new about Zionism in this respect. It was a traditional colonial enterprise, although obviously it had different unique features. It didn't have a particular mother country, though in essence Britain adopted it. And likewise, the Zionist movement itself was a fairly unique formation, but that doesn't detract in any sense, shape or form from the fact that Israel is today a settler colonial state, and Zionism was a settler colonial movement. I think that should be taken for granted. And ethnic cleansing, the removal of the Palestinians, was there from the start. Although they hid it originally, they didn't openly talk about it, although people like Ben Gurion and others spoke about it in private, Ben Gurion with his son and others internally. Transfer, as it's called, was always an inherent part of the program. And indeed, Woodrow Wilson set up a commission in Woodrow Wilson, the American president, set up the King Crane Commission in 1919, which went out to Palestine to talk with the Zionist leadership that had just come over there to spy out their new conquests, as it were. And they reported, I'll quote, they said, the fact came out repeatedly in the Commission's conference with Jewish representatives that the Zionists looked forward to a practically complete dispossession of the non-Jewish inhabitants of Palestine. And that could be, you can read that amongst other places, George Antonius's The Arab Awakening. And those who led, of course, the Zionist movement at that stage, and those who built the state in a sense, were the labor Zionists, the so-called socialist Zionists, who coined the slogan from class to nation. In other words, the class struggle was not against the employer, the Jewish bourgeoisie, but was against the Arabs themselves. And their socialism was of a nationalist type. Zev Sternhell, who's a left Zionist, or the late Zev Sternhell, in his book, The Founding Myths of Israel, described how he would have called Zionism a form of National Socialism, but for the fact that Nazis had tainted the term. But I say you could read his introduction
Tony, I wonder, you have 8 minutes left. If you might want to sort of come back on the question of one state. Yeah. Why do you think that's the solution, and how it would work?
Yes, of course. Well, I don't think I need to spend much time on it, but I am just really laying the basis for what comes next, because what I'm really saying is that Israel, first of all, is a state based on ethnic cleansing. Secondly, as Olivia Rukach said in a book, The Sacred Terror, she showed the discussions amongst the Israeli government, Moshe Dayan, Ben Gurion, and Sharet, and so on, about which piece of territory in someone else's state they could take over, because, of course, their ultimate goal was Eretz Yisrael, the biblical land of Israel. On the question of two states, one state, and so on, I believe socialists need to, and indeed Palestine Solidarity supporters, put out quite clearly what their programmatic vision is, what they see as the solution. And I would argue that the solution is the same, ultimately, as that in South Africa, which is a unitary, democratic, secular state. Of course, there are differences in terms of demography. There's roughly equal numbers of Israeli Jews and Palestinians. But to accept a two-state solution means, quite simply, you accept Israel as it is. And I think that's unacceptable. In practice, Zionism will never concede a two-state solution. And I think that's been made very, very clear by all the Israeli government representatives we have. And why do I say that? I mean, there are those who will say that the Israeli Jews constitute a nation, but I disagree with that. Or if they're a nation, they're a settler nation, and a settler nation has no right as an oppressor to self-determination. What is it in the end that binds Israeli Jews together, if not antagonism to the indigenous population, the Palestinians? That is the main basis of their nationhood. I mean, for sure, they have certain national attributes, such as language, and that could be easily accommodated, as it is in South Africa, in a constitutional settlement. But there is no doubt in my mind that Israeli Jews do not constitute a nation. And the program has to be one state with equal rights for everybody. It's not a question of national rights, it's a question of equality above all. And that, to me, is the solution. Now, the question of how to obtain that is obviously a very, very difficult question. And I would posit this, that Israel is supported by the West and by Biden, and we've seen there is nothing Israel can do that the Western leaders will not approve of, whatever massacres, whatever human rights abuses, the attacks on hospitals, on doctors, on ambulances, you name it, Israel has done it. And still the West continues to pour arms and weaponry into Gaza. But the solution, in a sense, is a regional-wide one. And I agree with Moshe. Where I differ is I don't think we can set a precondition for the achievement of socialism. Quite simply, let us be realistic. Socialism hasn't been achieved in any country in the world. There are certain anti-imperialist states, whether it's such as Cuba, for example, but there is no socialist state. And the question is whether, in fact, a solution to the Palestinian question could be achieved before socialism. And I think, yes, if there is a revolution, a national revolution in the Arab East, because that is the crucial matter. We've seen the Arab rulers pitiful in a way. I mean, whereas certain countries, I think Ecuador, Belize, and even I think Colombia have cut off diplomatic relations, the Arab rulers have done their absolute best to keep within the American orbit because they're creatures of the United States in the end. They are the reason, in a sense, why Israel is doing what it's doing and why it's supported by the West of the hilt. So it is the overthrow of the Arab regimes in the Arab East, which is the precondition for the overthrow of Zionism. But as far as what the solution is, I am absolutely clear. It is a single democratic state. Anyone who posits two states that is a Jewish state, is basically saying that Zionism will reassert itself because it can do no other in such a context. So thank you very much. I don't know whether I've gone over my time, but I'll keep
You've still
it.
got 2 minutes if you want to say something else, if you want to make another point.
Well, I mean, I simply mentioned, I mean, what I will, yes, in those 2 minutes, I'll simply say this, that Israel today is weaponizing anti-Semitism and the Holocaust such as never before, in a sense that its only explanation, its only rationale is anti-Semitism and the memory of the Holocaust. And let me just quote Gideon Levy in a 2019 article in Haaretz, when he talked about the Israeli school children who went to Auschwitz, not to learn the lessons of Auschwitz, but in order to instill in them militarism and nationalism. And he said, I have yet to hear a single teenager come back from Auschwitz and say that we mustn't abuse others the way we were abused. There has yet to be a school whose pupils came back from Birkenau, the main killing area of Auschwitz, straight to the Gaza border, saw the barbed wire fence and said never again. The message is always the opposite. Gaza is permitted because of Auschwitz. And that is the Zionist lesson. Thank you.
Thank you very much, comrade. Adam, you're next. Could you please unmute yourself? I know I had to mute you earlier. Apologies. There should be a button on your mobile phone. If you press on your screen, there should be the host is asking you to unmute. Can you see it? Not quite there yet. Apologize.
Unmute.
Now,
Do
there
you
we
hear
are.
me
Thank
now?
you. Yes, we can hear you. Great.
Yes, I just had to push the unmute. Okay.
Yes. Could you maybe tilt your camera a little bit, or we can't see your face properly. That's it. Excellent. Yes. So Adam is from the Israeli peace organization Gush Shalom. So thank you very much for joining us.
Yes. So I would like to say, I know Tony very many years. I've once been hosted in his home, and we have been corresponding on and off for, I think, at least 20 years. And I'm not a Zionist. I don't like Zionism. And I agree with very much of what Tony said about the history of Zionism. I think if I have lived in the time of Herzl in the end of the 19th century, I would have opposed Zionism and would have said there are better ways to solve the problems of the Jews. But I did not live then. I live now, and I was born into the state of Israel as it is now. And I disagree with the assumption that it is not a national conflict and that the Israelis are not a nation. Yes, Israel is indeed part of this very big outburst of Europeans who, since the end of the 15th century, have been bursting out of Europe and conquering and settling in all the rest of the world. And we Israelis, like Americans and Canadians and Australians and New Zealanders and a few others, we are a nation which was created by people who took ships and crossed the sea and took by force the land of somebody else. And I don't accept the assumption of Zionism that the historically correct fact that the Jews lived in this country 2,000 years ago gave us the right to do that. And Americans conquered the North America from the Native Americans, Indians, however you call them, without needing to say that their ancestors lived there before. Then they had other excuses, but it doesn't matter. But the fact is, I don't think anybody, not Tony, not anybody else, will deny that the Americans and the Canadians and the Australians and the New Zealanders are nations. They've been nations which have been created by unjust robbery of the land of somebody else. Nevertheless, the nations which were created in that way are nations, and the Israelis are a nation in the same way. And and Israel has as much a right to exist as the United States, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. And it is not just a question of rights. It is a question of that there are here 7 million people with the strongest army in the Middle East, and they are not going to give up their nationhood. They are. Tony said, yeah, the solution is one state, so on, and how to get it. Now, that's a very complicated question. It's really very complicated. It just there is no conceivable way to do it because Israelis are not going to accept it voluntarily, and there is not anybody strong enough to force upon them against their will. And there is the comparison, of course, with South Africa, but there are some very substantial differences. There is the question of international law, for example. In international law, South Africa was one nation, one state. There was a very clear what were the borders of South Africa. There was no question. Everybody was citizen of South Africa, the blacks and the whites. Only that South Africa said, yes, everybody is a citizen, but not all citizens have a right to vote. And then the world told South Africa that is unacceptable. That is racism. But for Israel, the position of international law is completely different. The position of international law is that there is a state of Israel. It has a very clearly recognized borders, the borders which existed between 1949, when Israel was accepted as a member state of the United Nations, until 1967. These borders are internationally recognized borders of Israel. The territory there is recognized as legitimate territory of Israel. And what Israel conquered in the 1967, that is regarded as occupied territory, which is not part of Israel. Israel, by the way, did not annex it itself, except for East Jerusalem. The United Nations is always saying what the solution is: Israel should withdraw out of these territories and let the Palestinians create their own state. There is a very big difference. There has never been a resolution of United Nations saying the solution for South Africa is to divide South Africa into a white state and a black state. There has been a resolution of the United Nations saying the solution for what was mandatory Palestine is to divide it into a Jewish state and an Arab state. And essentially, that is the solution which the whole international community is still supporting. That it makes a very big difference. There is also the question that the negotiating position of the black South Africans is much stronger. Was much stronger than the negotiating position of Palestinians towards Israel. If you talk in socialist terms, then there is a question that the black South Africans were in a condition to paralyze the gold and diamond mines, which were the mainstay of the South African economy. That was a very strong and effective way of pressuring. That was certainly had a significant role in getting rid of apartheid. The Palestinians don't have anything comparable. They could say Israel does not have any kind of mines, gold or diamonds. They would say the comparable part of the Israeli economy is the high-tech industry, and the Palestinians have absolutely no access and no part in this industry. And so the black South Africans had a strong way of economically influencing the regime. Their strikes were very effective at the moment when they were able to form their unions. Palestinians have no such way of pressuring Israel. Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza need to work in Israel. They are miserable. They are very miserable now when the West Bankers are not allowed to work in Israel. Of course, the Gazans have very many other reasons to feel miserable. And they very desperately need their work in Israel. Israel does not need them. Israel is at this moment contemplating bringing a lot of migrant workers from India to replace the Palestinian workers, which the Israel can do, provided that India will give these workers. So the Palestinians have a much weaker negotiating position towards Israel than the blacks in South Africa had towards the whites, and still even that the blacks in South Africa had to very substantially compromise. They had to accept that the whites in South Africa gave up political power, but they retained their economic privileges. Until this moment, 80% of the land in South Africa is still under white ownership. So the blacks in South Africa, with a stronger negotiating position, could impose one state with every one person, one vote, so on. Palestinians are not in a position to impose that on Israel. Palestinians could be very, very happy if they could get a Palestinian state in the West Bank and Gaza Strip, which are 22% of historic Palestine. Palestinians could say, no, we deserve much more than that. Very possibly they deserve much more than that, but that is the maximum which they can get under very favorable conditions, which I don't know if these conditions will exist. Perhaps now exactly because of what happened on October 7, the world is realizing that the Palestinian problem is a very acute problem, that it cannot be allowed to fester, that it has to be dealt with. President Biden is at this moment saying that he means seriously to implement the two-state solution. Whether or not he should be believed, I'm not sure. He has to prove it. I'm not taking anything on.
Adam, could you just adjust your camera again a little bit?
Yes, sorry.
Thank you.
Sorry. So I say the only practical solution is the two-state solution, a state of Israel and the state of Palestine in the 67 borders, the solution which is in theory already for many years accepted by the whole international community, but until now the international community has not done anything substantial to force this solution to be implemented. I hope it will be. Any other solution could be very, very nice, very, very good, very beautiful, very just. It could be very many things. Just one thing it cannot be, not possible to implement it. Very simple. And we are now in Israel doing what we can against this terrible war in Gaza. I'm in fact just now coming directly from a rally in the Cinematheque Square of Tel Aviv. There were several thousand people protesting about the terrible things which happened in Gaza, and of course it was planned already in advance. But of course this terrible thing of today, the more than 100 people killed in this truck, was the kind of the last straw. We hope very much that there will be a ceasefire and exchange of prisoners between Israel and Hamas, and that this ceasefire, even if the government would not want it to be permanent, that it would turn out to be permanent, and it would be the effective end of this terrible war. We hope that the people who were expelled from the city of Gaza and are now living in very terrible conditions under the open sky in all kind of very makeshift tents in the city of Rafah will be allowed to go back to their city and start reconstructing it. Of course, it will take years and years to reconstruct Gaza to deploy to the way it was before this war, and it was not in a very good shape even then. And we hope that we can get the end of the occupation. We can let the Palestinians have their own state. It is not a perfect solution. It is not a perfect justice. It would be a very, very big improvement over the situation as it is now. over a situation as it was in the already for decades. And that is the only thing, the only practical solution which I can offer.
Thank you, Adam.
Do I have still time to?
You've got 3 minutes left. Maybe I could ask you a question as well. Maybe you could answer that as well.
Yes, if you want to ask a question, fine.
It's interesting that you were at a demonstration today, a protest. Can you give us an indication about what the, how many people are actually supporting an end of the war against Gaza in Israel, which I think, the Israeli working class is crucial to an end to this, isn't it?
There were there, I think, between 2,000 and 3,000 people. That is more or less how many people this square, the Cinematheque Square of Tel Aviv, can hold, and it was quite full. And let's say in the very beginning of the war, after these terrible things which happened on October 7, we were very, very isolated. There was a kind of the Israeli public was very much full of a kind of a terrible war frenzy, which I can't remember anything like that any previous time in my lifetime. I'm already not such a young person. There was of course because Hamas did terrible things. They killed a lot of people in their homes. They raped women. It was very terrible. And there were people in Israel, very much the general public was feeling that they deserve a very terrible revenge. Some people in Israel went actually as far as openly calling for genocide. That was very prominent in the case of South Africa, which is the case which South Africa presented against Israel in the International Court in The Hague. Quite a lot of people did not go so far as advocating the genocide, but were very happy actually to see the city of Gaza ruined, and they say they deserve it. They brought it upon themselves. In the last, I would say, the last month or two, there is a gradual shift in the public opinion. The open protests against the war, which were in the beginning really forcibly put down by the police whenever we tried to go into the street, are now possible. Also, the police is still trying to interfere. There are more and more people speaking, realizing that this war is futile, that the official war aim of to totally destroy Hamas is just not possible, because they see that the war is going on, and Hamas is suffering terrible blows, but it is not broken. And the Israeli army is suffering more and more losses in the guerrilla war, which is developing now in the Gaza Strip. So there is now say a space open in the Israeli public to openly oppose the war. It is still, we are still a minority. I don't delude myself about it, but there is a possibility, and I think that if this war does not end in the near future, and it will drag on like the war which Israel had in Lebanon, started in 1982 and dragged on until the year 2000 for 18 years, with a lot of more and more soldiers killed and more futility. I think it will this.
Oh, Adam, I'm sorry. I think your internet is probably a bit dodgy, but I think we've come to an end now with him. Oops. Okay, there we are. Okay, next speaker is Moshe. I think it was very interesting actually to hear from somebody who actually supports the two-state solution, because we don't have that a lot on the left now in Britain. So that was quite interesting to hear that. He made a few good points actually. I think in comparison, South Africa and Israel-Palestine doesn't very much work in my view either. I think we can get Tony, etc. I know Tony wants to reply to him as well. After Moshe and Steve have spoken, I think you can come back in if you like. So over to you, Moshe. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Unlike Tony, unlike Adam, and unlike Steve, I don't have a blueprint. I think it is premature to have any blueprint because I think both Tony and Adam, for different reasons, are overly optimistic as to the feasibility of any kind of solution anytime soon. I think it will not be anytime soon that a proper solution, that is to say, an equitable and benign solution will be possible. I think this Israeli-Palestinian or Zionist-Palestinian conflict is like the climate crisis and the eco crisis, which have no resolution under capitalism. We have to, it's a sad fact, in my opinion, it's a sad thought. It's not very optimistic. I wish there were a possible solution under capitalism, but I don't think so. And for this reason, I don't think it is now a time to make an exact blueprint. I think that a solution, if and when it becomes possible, will be a socialist solution. It will be regional, and it will not be confined to the box of Palestine. I think instead of blueprints, I think we should start from certain principles. First of all, what are the minimum conditions that a benign and equitable resolution must satisfy? Secondly, what is the nature of the conflict? What is it about? Because we can't resolve a conflict if we don't know what it's about. If we leave the conflict as it is, then it's no solution. And thirdly, and I hope to be able to come to that point, how a proper resolution can be achieved when it becomes possible. So first of all, what are the minimum conditions for a solution? Equal rights for all. I say individual rights for all and national rights. There are two nations. I think the analogy with South Africa, for reasons that Adam spelled out very, very correctly. The analogy is false. The political economy is false. It is a different form of colonization. Israeli colonization is more like Australia, Canada, etc., not like South Africa, where the settlers relied for their political economy on the exploitation of indigenous labor power. The Zionist colonization was based on the displacement of the indigenous population. They were surplus to requirement as they were in Australia and Canada, etc. So, and as in all other colonizations of this type, where the settlers relied on their own labor power, the settlers formed into a new nation. And we have a Hebrew, so-called Israeli Jewish nation. And so equality of national rights is also an essential minimum requirement, because no nation will accept an unequal status. No nation will accept to be dominated by another. This was the fallacy of Israel after 1968. They thought that they could sustain the occupation indefinitely, and they were surprised at the atrocities of 7th of October, as if it couldn't have been predicted. It not only could have been predicted, it was predicted. I predicted it in 1968. I'm on record as predicting that something like this would happen. It was published in Haaretz on 22nd of September 1967, a statement of which I'm a signatory, actually the last surviving signatory, warning that something like this would happen. Unequal status between nations will lead exactly to the same situation. Of the underdogs will not accept their role, their position as underdogs. They will rebel against it, and this will not actually end in a solution. It will end exactly like the unequal status under occupation. Okay, well, this is minimum condition. Of course, the right of the Palestinian refugees to return is also a minimum requirement. If we speak about international law, this is a right of refugees to return to their home, recognized by international law. Okay, what is the nature of the conflict? The nature of the conflict, I think, has been recognized correctly by both Tony and Adam. It is a colonial conflict. No, it has the form of a state of war between two nations, but this is only the surface form. It is actually a symptom of what is essentially a colonial conflict. The Zionist project is a project of colonization. And contrary to what seems to have emerged from Adam's presentation, Israel is not only a product of colonization. Under its Zionist regime, it is also an instrument of ongoing colonization. The Zionist project is still work in progress. And for this reason, so long as the Zionist regime is in power, no solution is possible. A proper, benign, and equitable solution presupposes the decolonization of the situation. And decolonization in this instance means de-Zionization. So long as we have a Zionist Israel, a solution will not be possible. It is an illusion to think so. Now I want to come to the not to an abstract geometry of two-state solution. I think when a solution becomes possible, it may be two-state, one state, a federal state, binational state. We cannot prejudge this. But I want to address the two-state solution, so-called solution, which is in fact a two-state illusion as it is discussed now, as it is presented in the existing, in the current situation, as well as the one-state so-called solution, or as it is presented by Tony prior to the overthrow of capitalism. The two-state solution, first of all, is extremely unlikely. If Adam Keller thinks that the international community, which means, in fact, American imperialism and its camp followers, will impose by force a solution on Israel, then he's not actually looking at at his television screen. The Biden regime is talking about imposing or advising Israel to stop its over the top killing of Palestinians, but it's doing nothing about it. It's supplying arms to it. To expect the American administration to impose something on Israel which it rejects, as it has rejected two states from the word go. No major Zionist camp, no major Zionist party has ever really accepted a two-state solution. Not even Rabin. It is falsely assumed that the Oslo agreement that Rabin signed spoke about a two-state. It did not. And Rabin, in his last speech in the Knesset, actually made it clear that it was not about a two-state. It was a very unequal situation. An inequality between the two nations living side by side will inevitably lead to conflict because the underdogs will not accept their position. But it is very unlikely that the Americans will impose something on Israel. Israel will procrastinate, Israel will refuse, Israel will do what it has done with the two-state illusion until now, impose an impossible condition, delay and delay and delay, and in the end it will go poof, as one Secretary of State, as American Secretary of State put it. But in the unlikely event that they do impose such a two-state so-called solution, it will not be an equal solution. For example, they talk about ensuring the security of Israel. The security of Israel means that Israel will remain a Zionist state with its army and its nuclear arsenal. Side by side with it will be a demilitarized Palestinian so-called state. It will not be a state, it will be an Indian reservation. There is no chance in hell that the Americans will impose on Israel a solution, a two-state configuration in which the Palestinian so-called state will have a proper army. This Israel will refuse. They will also grant Israel, if and when this unlikely event of two-state configuration comes about, they will also give Israel the right to dictate who can be in power in this state. This is already on. If you read what Biden is saying, he's actually dictating to the Palestinians who can rule the Palestinian so-called state. No such right will be given to the Palestinians to dictate who can be in power in the Zionist state of Israel. In the case of conflict, which will eventually arise, inevitably arise, between settlers and Palestinian farmers in the so-called Palestinian state, the Israeli army will come to the aid of whom? The Palestinians or the settlers? Look at what they are doing now. So, on the other hand, when some of the Palestinians will resent their subordinate state and will try to resist it, Israel will do what it is doing now. It goes into not only Area C, not only Area B, but Area A of the Palestinian Authority. It goes into the Jenin, it goes into Nablus, and etc., and creates havoc. This is what it will do, and this is what will happen. Beware of what you wish for, Adam. What you wish for, if in the likely case that it comes about that the Americans will dictate as two-state configuration, it will be a disaster as the occupation has been so far. What about one state? Yes, one state, or at least some version of the one state solution that are being offered, because there are several versions of it. At least some versions are satisfy the minimum conditions of equal rights. The problem with it is whether it can be achieved. It requires the overthrow of the Zionist state. The one-state solution is not possible so long as we have a colonial settler state in existence under its colonial regime. That is to say, the Zionist state. It requires the overthrow of Zionism. And for reasons that Adam spelled out very correctly, this in the present situation is not on because there is no social force that is interested and able to overthrow Zionism as there was in South Africa. And this is correctly, as he correctly pointed out, due to the difference in the profound difference in the political economy between the South African colonization and the Israeli Zionist colonization, which is more like Australia. So how can a solution be realized? Is there a possible scenario in which it can be realized? I must say that the prospect doesn't look very optimistic. And this is because there is no historical precedent of decolonization of a colonial situation which is of the type common to Australia, Canada, and Israel, Palestine. There have been plenty of decolonizations, but they all took place in situations where the settlers were a minority exploiting the labor power of the indigenous people. The last case was South Africa. Israel, Palestine is very different. The point is that the overthrow of Zionism can only be possible with the participation and at least acquiescence of the Israeli masses, predominantly the Israeli working class. And this is a big problem because at present, under capitalism, the Israeli working class has nothing to gain from conditions of equality with the Palestinians. At present, the Israeli Jewish, the Hebrew working class is an exploited class, exploited under capitalism, but with national privileges vis-a-vis the Palestinians. If one state, like in South Africa, were to come about, if Zionism were overthrown, which is impossible without its consent, but what would the Israeli working class have to gain from a one-state solution under capitalism? Instead of being an exploited class with national privilege, it will become an exploited class without national privilege. That is not a possible deal for the Hebrew working class to support. In a socialist Middle East and in the socialist region of the Arab Middle East, a solution is possible because what can be offered to the Israeli working class is to exchange its position of an exploited class with national privileges to a position without national privileges, but taking part, being part of a new ruling class of the region, namely the working class. Now, you can tell me that this is not going to happen anytime soon, and I'm perfectly aware of this. I'm not under any illusion that this is something that is going to happen very soon. It is one of those problems, as I said in my opening remarks, that cannot have a solution under capitalism, contrary to what happened in South Africa. But like the problem of the climate crisis, like the ecological crisis, anyone who thinks that these can be solved under capitalism, I think is deluding himself. And I think the same applies to the Israeli-Palestinian colonial conflict. It cannot have a solution under capitalism. It may not have a solution at all. Nobody can be certain. Nobody can be certain that the climate crisis will have a solution. Maybe we are doomed. I mean, this is a distinct possibility. Maybe the ecological crisis will have no solution. But if they do, it can only be under a different socio-economic regime than capitalism. Any other idea is an illusion. And so is the two-state illusion under present circumstances. No solution on the lines of a one state is possible under capitalism. And I rest my case in this. I may sound very pessimistic, but I don't think there is any grounds for false optimism in the case that we are dealing with. It is not going to happen anytime soon that an equitable and reasonable and benign solution will be forthcoming. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Moshe. That was 3 minutes longer than 15 minutes, but I thought it was worthwhile letting you continue because that was a very important introduction. Thank you, comrade. What I suggest we do now, actually, because I think there's a lot within those first few introductions already, and that before we bring in people from the floor, that we actually allow the main speakers to answer to each other, because that is a really important part of the discussion. So Steve is going to talk for 10 minutes about the idea of a federal solution, and then I'm going to bring in Tony, Adam, and Moshe if they want. You don't have to speak, but if you want to reply to some of what the other comrades have said, that would be quite useful. So over to you, Steve.
Yeah, thank you, Tina. My notes began with the terrible outrage that we heard about today with starving people being killed. But I know we haven't really got time to go into all that, as you've already said, but I just was so disgusted. I can't not mention it. I did want to make this point and to set it in context that the Republican Labour Education Forum was set up to promote and develop democratic and Republican ideas for the Labour movement in England and the rest of the UK. After October the 7th, with the Israeli invasion, destruction of Gaza, we obviously had to turn our attention to Palestine. And we noticed the US government, the British government, the Tories, the Liberal Democrats, the Labour Party, all supported the two-state solution. And beyond this, the TUC and all the major trade unions support the same. And Moshe has made an argument for us about against the two-state solution. But we believe that we should oppose the two states. I call it two states ideology rather than a solution, I think is better, because what does it actually mean, really? But the question is, if you're going to oppose it, if you were going the Labour movement to oppose it, people ask you, well, what's the alternative then in that case? We will be asked, if you're going to knock that out and not just leave it there, what is the alternative? And so, but we are not trying to write a program or make a blueprint for Israel-Palestine. All we were trying to do was to think out what is the most democratic solution that we could see for this terrible situation. And so we then came up with this idea, looking at our own politics, of a democratic, secular, federal republic of Israel and Palestine. And we can call it one state with two nations, and we set that out in a position paper. And it seemed like a new idea, but as soon as we looked into it, it wasn't a new idea at all. You can trace it back to Noam Chomsky, you could trace it back to Judah Mang. Various people had versions of what are called a bi-national state, but I don't like all the bi-national state versions. I think this one is the most democratic one. So we thought there are two problems that we should, well, there are actually three problems, okay? Three problems that need to be addressed. And I do accept there's a big pie in the sky, which of these ideas is pie in the sky? That's one. And which of them is optimistic? Which of them is pessimistic? We're all going to end up talking about that. One problem is partition. Second problem, I believe, is a crisis of democracy. And then the third one is the role of Anglo-American and EU imperialism and the various authoritarian states in the Middle East. And in a sense, Moshe goes most to addressing that idea in what he's suggesting. And I'm not going to say much about that, but we maybe can at some other time. So obviously the partition of British mandated Palestine in 1948, the Nakba, and the repartition in 1967 was a disaster, symbolized, I think, by the partition wall, or as it's called, the wall of apartheid, 440 miles long, which came out of the Second Intifada. Now, this partition is an economic and social disaster. And certainly on one side, you can see the poverty and underdevelopment. But actually, I think it also doesn't do anything for the Israeli working class either. I think there's considerable poverty amongst Israeli citizens as well, and considerable economic waste. If you think about all the bureaucracy and all the arms production that's got to go in to maintain, and the army that's got to be put, so it's a massively expensive system, this partition state. And so the argument really is that the partition state must be ended. There must be free movement of goods, services, capital, labor, etc. And of course, the 5 to 6 million refugees are excluded that would also add to economic development in that area. So that's one aspect of it, okay? Second, I think the crisis of democracy. Well, the crisis of democracy in Israel, we have creeping fascism, we have Netanyahu's government, we have the fact that this war breeds dictatorship, we have the unwritten constitution, we have the Supreme Court, the massive demonstrations that took place before the war began, we have the Jewish nation state law, we have 20% of Arab Israelis are second-class citizens who are discriminated against in many ways, and etc. Then if you cross the wall, what happens on the other side of the wall is democracy going well there. And obviously not absence of democracy, absence of civil rights, no elections, no accountability to the Palestinian Authority, daily oppression of occupation, political prisoners, a large number of political prisoners. And now in Gaza, you could almost say it's fascism in Gaza imposed by the IDF. So you've got a very serious problem that democracy is on the way out or is in serious crisis. I was very interested to hear what Adam said about some demonstrations now starting to come out on the street. And once they get their confidence up, they'll come back again, I think, in a much bigger way. So I think that is something that should fill us with optimism. So the solutions, therefore, flow from these two problems. One, end partition and occupation. Two, one state, one integrated economy, one single market. A democratic secular republic with full equality between all citizens, and that's Tony saying. That's nothing unique different to what Tony's really saying. But it has to be, I believe, a federal republic of two nations. There are two nations there, an Israeli nation and a Palestinian nation, and a federal republic would enable there to be much greater unity between the Palestinian and Israeli working class. Now, this is not talking about, this is a rather more radical solution than some people might think. Simply because we're not talking about a Zionist Israel continuing, we're talking about a democratic secular Israel. That is an Israel without Zionists. So for that to happen, there has to be a change inside Israel. There has to be a democratic movement inside Israel. Now, we might be very pessimistic about that, but I'm not totally pessimistic given the mass movement we saw before the war began. Now, I think if we come to one state, there are obviously two versions of one state that I would reject completely. One is Greater Israel, which is basically the liquidation of the Palestinian nation, ethnic cleansing, genocide, and all the rest of it. But I think the idea of a greater Palestine, in other words, to liquidate the Israeli nation, would lead us towards ethnic cleansing and lead us towards genocide, and that's the argument made. So the democratic solution has to recognize an Israel in which 20% of Israelis, second-class citizens, are Israelis. Israelis is not 100% Jewish, Israel is 80-20. And we have to keep reminding ourselves and not equating Israel just simply with the Hebrew or Jewish population. So I think that, so therefore I would say this, a federal republic of two nations is about a democracy and about the unity of the working class. Now, I won't go into the question now because we're going to be out of time about the Anglo-US imperialism, but the only solution to this, it has to be with the working class in America and in the UK and in Europe, because the role of imperialism cannot be stopped by anything that's happening in Israel and Palestine as such. So really, there's a struggle in America, there's a struggle here that's already going on about our own democracy, when a mob has apparently invaded the streets, etc. We've heard the rhetoric being whipped. So we have our own crisis of democracy that we have to address, which has come up because of what's happening in Palestine. So I would say this, that just to summarize this, the 3 points of this proposal are: one, it is the most democratic proposal as set against all the other proposals for a democratic secular republic which recognizes democratic rights of Israelis and Palestinians and their right to self-determination. It's radical because it goes to the root of the problem of the partition of 1948. And it's radical because it says that there can be no solution that allows the Jewish Zionist Republic to continue. It has to be replaced by a democratic secular republic. This is not to reverse partition. It's not about going back to 1948, but rather transcending it or overcoming partition. That's what has to be done. We can't go backwards. And in a sense, it's a revolutionary proposal because it does require, not in the sort of anarchist sense of revolution, but it does require the mobilization of the democratic forces in Israel and Palestine from below. Without that, of course, it would be unachievable. So there has to be a new constitutional settlement. Israel, just to end on this, but Israel doesn't have a proper constitution because they couldn't agree how to define the state back in 1948. They called it Jewish and democratic. And as Tony's already said before, you can't have a Jewish state which is democratic. It's just a contradiction in terms. So Israel needs a proper democratic secular constitution, as do the Palestinians. So I think, Tina, I will stop there. I'd like to engage with all the other positions, but time doesn't allow it. I just wanted to concentrate on that.
I think it was useful you mentioning the working class and not just in Israel, but also in the UK and the USA. I think that is a very important question that hasn't been raised yet tonight. Comrades, I think actually this has been it is a very interesting discussion, and I don't think we often get these three main positions in one room. So actually I think we should really concentrate on letting the main speakers reply to each other and perhaps not get to the audience participation, which is usually quite an important part, but I think this is really quite an important discussion. So I want to give Tony, Adam, and Moshe at least 10 minutes to reply to each other and then see how we go. Tony, do you want to make a start? Oh, you're muted.
Yep.
Yep, there you go.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with much of what Moshe said in his thoughtful exposition. As regards Steve, I just have to say, I think your solution is a dog's dinner, which will appeal to no one. There is no possibility of a democratic movement within the Israeli state amongst the Israeli Jews themselves. And the mass uprisings you saw before October the 7th were confined to demands within the settler population. They largely excluded the Arab or the Palestinian Israelis from that, and that will not change. Indeed, I would go further and say this, that if it wasn't for the Palestinians, if, for example, the Jewish state had been formed in a Pacific island with no indigenous population, then you would have had civil war, because half of the Israelis identify as Israelis and half of them identify as Jews, and most of those who identify as Jews now identify increasingly as messianic fundamentalists who believe that with the resurrection, the third temple and live animal sacrifices, they will then be able to reach out for their God. I don't think there's a cat in hell's chance of any such movement taking off within Israel. And incidentally, the question of the working class. Well, yes, in certain situations, as Marx said, of course, the working class is an agent of change, the gravedigger of capitalism. But that is only in certain situations. In the context of a settler colonial state, the working class can become and does become the most reactionary section of the population. You saw that in South Africa, where the white working class was to the right of the political spectrum of the apartheid, not to the left. You saw that in the Deep South in America. Again, the working class used to take half a day off on a Friday so they could go and watch a lynching. You saw that in Australia and Canada. The working class was certainly not progressive. So the idea that the working class is automatically on the side of social change, I think is simply an illusion. And it's fetishizing the working class in itself, not the working class for itself. And that's, I think, a crucial difference. What do we mean by self-determination of a nation? It really means the right of a nation to be free from national oppression. And that does not occur for settler nations because they're not oppressed in the first place. And people say, well, what about America or Canada and so on and so forth? Yes, where the situation has played out such that the indigenous population has been completely crushed or exterminated, then yes, the settlers form a nation of sorts. But even in America, even in Australia, the vestigial remains of that settler state continue, as we see with the situation of the Aborigines or the Indians, or indeed the Black people in America. Those questions have not been resolved. So to that extent, I ask, what is the American nation? What is the Canadian nation? What is the Australian nation? Does it include the Aborigines? Does it include the Native Americans? Does it in fact include the Black people of America? And these are real concrete questions, and it's not a question of facile descriptions or labels that you can simply stick on and apply to those situations. That's why I don't believe the question of self-determination is a very real one. It simply avoids the problem we have in Israel, which is one of Zionism and Jewish supremacy. And within Israel, although there are 20% Palestinians, they're not part of the Israeli nation. There is, in fact, no Israeli nationality. There is a Jewish nation, and that is the only nation that exists in Israel, as cemented by the Jewish nation state law. So, for instance, when Bedouins have lived for 50, 60 years in the Negev, they're told they're squatting on state land, because it's automatically assumed that state land is Jewish state land. They have no rights in the same sense that that Israeli Jews would have. No Israeli Jews are told they're squatting on state land. It is automatically assumed they have a right to that land by virtue of being Jewish. But the same is not true of Arab Israelis. And that is why they're not even second-class citizens. Their citizenship is a degraded form of citizenship at best. It gives them certain rights, namely the right to vote. In the case of the Bedouins, because they live in unrecognized villages, half the villages in the Negev are unrecognized. They don't even have a ballot box in their village. They don't have running water or electricity and so on. So we have to deal with the concrete realities of what the Israeli state has become. Now, of course, it's not possible to project into the future as to what may come about. And in that sense, I agree with Moshe. It's very hard to have a crystal ball at this time. Things may progress very quickly. It may well be there is an Arab uprising in the Middle East, which does overthrow those regimes, and that may come very quickly. We can't predict any of that. But of course, I am absolutely certain, and this I agree with Moshe, that the situation in Palestine cannot be resolved in Palestine itself, what Moshe calls the box of Palestine. It has to be a region-wide solution. My differences with him is I do believe it is possible to envisage in certain situations a national uprising of the Arab peoples that overthrows their regimes, and in the process does endanger Zionism, which after all is there to prevent any such revolution. It's a possibility. I can't predict, and it may well be I'll never live to see it. Who knows? But that is the only solution that I see happening. Whether that develops into a socialist revolution, I don't know. I hope it would do, but there's no prediction. But I wouldn't therefore say that the achievement of a solution to the Palestinian question today is contingent on the achievement of socialism. I think that would be going too far. It may be, but it is by no means certain. But what I am convinced of, to go back to what I said at the beginning, is that there is no solution within Israel amongst the Jewish people. And there would be no point and no reason to form a separate Jewish state, whether it's within a confederation or anything else, because that would simply allow Jewish supremacy to reassert itself. There has to be a state where all are equal. and not where politics is not decided on the basis of one's ethnicity. Of course, there would be certain national rights, if that's what you want to call them, in such a state, such as Jewish language rights, for example, religious freedoms, and so on. And all sorts of compromises are possible. But the essence is that for the removal of apartheid and Jewish supremacy, Zionism has to go in all its forms, and no tinkering around with constitutional settlement, Steve, will achieve that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Adam, please.
Yes, I hope you hear me.
Yep, very good, very well.
Yes, okay. So
Could you
I have
adjust
to
your
be.
camera again?
I don't.
Sorry, Adam. Could you adjust your camera?
Yes,
I can't see
yes.
your.
I don't like it that I have to be in the process of you could say the most conservative speaker among everybody here, but I have to say I quite agree with Tony about the impossibility of having any kind of radical anti-Zionist change within the Jewish Israeli society. I'm part of this society. I've been in actor since I was a high school student in Tel Aviv, and when you look how many hairs I have on my head, you will see how long ago that was. And I think that under certain situations, under a situation of extreme international pressure, Jewish Israelis might agree to withdraw from the West Bank and Gaza Strip and let the Palestinians create there an independent state. I can't see a situation where Jewish Israelis would be ready to go further than that. I don't think even strong international pressure would force Israelis to give up Zionism. To give Zionism, if I want to summarize what Zionism is a state where the majority of the citizens are Jewish. This majority Jewish citizens elect a parliament where the majority of the parliament members are Jewish. This parliament elects a government which is composed of Jewish ministers with sometimes one or two token Arab ministers and unimportant portfolios, usually not even that. And this government is in control of an army which is composed mainly of Jewish officers commanding Jewish soldiers. That is the essence, basic structure of Israel. I don't see Jewish Israelis being ready from voluntarily to give up this structure, and I don't see a force in the world strong enough to break up this structure. I think the only way to break up this structure is to find an army strong enough and willing to fight the Israeli army and defeat it in total war, which would mean a nuclear war, because the Israeli army would use its nuclear weapons before it is giving up. And anyway, there is no such army in the offing. So the only solution which I can see in practice is that the existing state of Israel, the Zionist state of Israel with its army and so on, would withdraw to the 67 borders and let the Palestinians create a state in the West Bank and Gaza. And that's not a perfect solution. That is the only thing, the only thing which is in favor of it is that it is the only possible solution. And what Moshe said is that it would be, of course, much weaker than Israel. It would not have its own army. It would not have its own air force and armored corps. But we see exactly right now in Gaza that Palestinians are able to give the Israeli army quite a lot of trouble, even without having a single airplane and without having a single tank. The Israeli army is already mired 4 months in the Gaza Strip and is not anywhere near overcoming the resistance of Hamas. So I think that the Palestinian state, which will be an official state recognized, a sovereign state, member of the United Nations, with internationally recognized territory, that any Israeli incursion into this territory would be a violation of international law. It would not be totally helpless towards Israel. It would be weaker than Israel for sure, but if I try to think of an analogy, which is not a perfect analogy, but and not a very nice or attractive analogy, but I would say roughly the relationship of United States with Mexico. I mean, Mexico is certainly much weaker politically, economically, militarily than United States. United States in theory, if United States really wanted to conquer Mexico, it could do it, but Mexicans certainly feel that they have a much stronger, more powerful neighbor. But still, I think if we compare the situation of the Palestinians vis-a-vis Israel at this moment with the situation of Mexico towards the United States, I think that it would be a very, very big improvement for the Palestinians to be in the situation of Mexico towards the United States. That's and I want to say just one thing historical about how did we come into this situation of Zionist Israel as it is. The fact is that the founding fathers of Zionism, like Theodor Herzl himself, were Jews, were middle class European Jews who first wanted to integrate in their own society. Herzl himself was a German nationalist before he was a Zionist, and there were all kinds among the founders of Zionism. There were a lot of people who originally were German nationalists, Hungarian nationalists, Romanian nationalists, Polish nationalists, some even Russian nationalists, and they all got to the point where they felt that they are not really wanted, that there is a kind of ceiling of which is imposed by anti-Semitism. They came to the conclusion that Jews will never achieve equality in Europe, and therefore they came gradually to the situation. So we have to go away and create our own state. Of course, not all European Jews in the 19th century came to this conclusion, but the ones who became Zionists came to this conclusion. And the tragic paradox of Zionism was that these Jews, like Herzl and the rest of these people, they thought we have to go away from Europe. We will never achieve equality here. So we have to create our own state, which will be like all the other states. But then, when they thought we want to have a state like all the other states, then the model which they had of what is a normal state like all the other states, the concept was a normal state is a state where there is a dominant ethnic group, and a national or religious minority could never achieve equality and has to go somewhere else. So when that was the model which the Zionist founding fathers had, how does a state look like? Then it's not surprising that state of Israel looks like it is. So you could say that the problem of Zionism started even before they came to Palestine and before they met actually one Arab face to face. That was already the problem was essentially already there. And I can't say I have a very good solution to this problem. I wish if there had been such a thing as a time machine in reality, I wish very much that I could have gone with a time machine back to Vienna in the end of the 19th century and talked with Herzl and told him, listen, do you realize that the solution which you want to find for the Jewish problem is going to mess up the lives of Jews and of a lot of other people for a century and a half at least? I think even he might have been willing to listen to me, but of course that is totally hypothetical. There are no time machines in reality. So in reality, we just have to live with the nasty effects of history and try to make the best of them. That is the only thing which I can say.
Thank you, Adam. Can I ask you a question, though? Who do you think would actually bring about the two-state solution? I mean, as Moshe mentioned, and Tony, the Zionist regimes, none of them ever had any interest in ever doing that, allowing the Palestinians to have a state. Do you see the US putting pressure on?
I can, if I can say that there is the big question which we will never know. We will never know the answer to. What would have happened if Prime Minister Rabin had not been assassinated, and if he had been re-elected as Prime Minister in 1996, and if he was able to continue the Oslo process which he started? Would he have gone through with letting Palestinians have a state or not? That is something which is very much debated among us, and there is no conclusive answer. I believe personally that he might have, if he had lived, then there was the Oslo Agreement had a provision that there should have been started negotiations about the definite solution in 1996 and should have ended in 1999, and then the implementation of this agreed solution should have started. I believe it is possible. I'm not sure, but I believe that Rabin felt really that Israel cannot go on with the Palestinians the way it was. That was his conclusion from the first Intifada, and that he might have agreed to let Palestinians have their state. And if so, then we might now, instead of the terrible situation now, we might now be near the 25th anniversary of peace between Israel and Palestine. But you can never know. So I hope, as I said, President Biden has been saying in the last few months that he seriously means talking about the two-state solution, that is not anymore lip service, but that he really wants it to be implemented. As they say, the proof of the pudding is eating. I want to see whether Biden really means it. But in general, I want to say there is no inherent contradiction between Zionism and letting Palestinians have their states. There is an inherent contradiction between Zionism and giving up the Jewish state, but there is no inherent contradiction between Israel, the Zionist Israel with its army withdrawing from certain territory and letting Palestinians have this territory. That can be compatible with Zionism under some conditions. So I hope that what can be compatible with Zionism under some conditions will become reality. That's the only thing which I can hope for.
Thank you very much, Adam. I'd be interested to hear Moshe's thoughts on this.
Well, thank you very much. I have very little to say, new to say regarding Steve's blueprint. It is a blueprint. It satisfies the minimum conditions. The problem is it is not feasible in the present circumstances for reasons that I've already gone into. You cannot achieve it without the consent and at least compliance of the Israeli working class. And this is, under present circumstances, there is no reason why this would be forthcoming. As for Tony, he is absolutely right that the Israeli working class at present, and I explained the reason why this is the case, is not going to support any de-Zionization of Israel. In the present circumstances, under capitalism, with short of a socialist transformation of the region, the Israeli working class has nothing to gain from an equitable solution, from the de-Zionization of Israel. Unlike Tony, I'm not in the position to be definite about the future. That is to say, are there any other circumstances in which this opposition, this disinterest of the Israeli working class in giving up Zionism will change? I think Tony is suffering from a rigidity of thought which thinks that what is permanent and is unchangeable. I think his idea that the solution that he advocates can be imposed short of the compliance and the support of the Israeli working class is a dangerous illusion. How can it be done? Will it be done by force, by a brute force directed against the Israeli people? I think this is a dangerous. It is an illusion. It is not possible, and it is a dangerous illusion, because any attempt to do it will end very badly, as I think recent history, or the history of the 20th century has shown. And even suppose one state, according to his recipe, were possible, if somehow it could be implemented, it could only be kept in existence with the constant suppression of the Hebrew nation, which would be denied its equal status with the Palestinian Arab nation. No nation can accept this subordinate position without equal rights, including national rights. No solution can actually be sustained, which is also my critique of Adam's position. He thinks that, first of all, he's victim of two illusions. First of all, he thinks that the so-called international community, that means American imperialism, is going to impose a two-state solution or two-state configuration, two-state configuration on Israel. There is no sign of this, certainly not under Biden, and even more certainly under Trump, which is likely to be very soon the president of the United States. Don't forget that this is probably is the likelier outcome of the next presidential elections in the United States. But even Biden is not going to do it. But even in the highly unlikely situation where Biden is going to impose some kind of two-state configuration, so-called two-state configuration on Israel, it is going to be highly unequal. And if Adam Keller would put himself in the position of the Palestinians, would Israelis agree to a subordinate position in the way that the so-called two-state solution is described now, without an army on 22% of the total territory, subject to dictate who is going to be in the government, who is not going to be in the government? The Israeli nation would not accept it, would resist, and would fight against it, and so will the Palestinian people, if they are put in this situation. It will be a continuation of a colonial situation under a different formal arrangement. It will be an Israeli state with an Indian reservation. And this is not going to be a solution at all. It will be, so be careful what you wish for, because this is not going to be a solution, even in the unlikely situation that it is realized. The definition that Adam Keller gave of Zionism is deficient. First of all, there is no major Zionist camp. That is, if you go from the camp which was originally led by Ben-Gurion to the one led by Zev Jabotinsky and beyond, none of these has ever given up the Zionist claim over the whole of Palestine. This is the official Zionist position as declared in the conference, Biltmore Conference of the Zionist movement in May 1942. The claim is for the whole of Palestine. Moreover, his definition is also deficient in another respect. Zionism did not only claim to create, and only wish to create a Jewish nation state. As the Israeli legal position is now, Israel claims, and this is the Zionist position, Israel claims to be the nation state of the Jewish people. By this they mean of the Jewish people all around the world. All people of the Jewish religion or descendants of people of the Jewish religion have allegedly a claim over and in Palestine. That is to say, this is enshrined in the law of return. Israel claims to grant the right of colonization of Palestine, not only to its own Hebrew people, but also to Jews all around the world. There is no Zionism without the law of return. So this is also to be understood. I think his definition of Zionism was too minimalist, too, as it were, vegetarian. Finally, we don't need to guess what Rabin would have done, because Rabin is clearly on the record as stating what he wanted, and he did so in his last speech in the Knesset shortly before he was assassinated. He presented the Oslo Agreement for the ratification of the Knesset just a couple of months before he was assassinated. And he is very clear. You can look at the record and the minutes of the Knesset. He says what we are proposing is not a Palestinian state. It is less than a state. It is less than a state, which means it is going to be a Jewish Israeli Zionist state with a Palestinian Indian reservation. This is what he wanted. What he would have agreed to later is subject to surmise. But the way Israeli politics have developed since then, I don't think that you could be too optimistic in retrospect as to what he would have wanted. So I rest my case. I think any idea of two states in the way it is proposed now, not as in a possible change situation of the Middle East, any single state, whether according to Steve Freeman's recipe blueprint or according to any other recipe, is engaging in illusion. So what does it leave us with? I think rather than proposing, we all socialists and supporting of justice in the Middle East. What we should be engaged in is not proposing some recipes which are in any case not feasible to realize in the present circumstances, but raise principles. And the principles are the minimum conditions which I've started with. We should advocate for equal rights for all. Is there equal rights, meaning equal individual rights for everyone, equal national rights for both national groups, the ones in Palestine, not including the alleged Jewish nation worldwide, which is a fabrication of Zionism. It doesn't exist. The actual existing nations. This is what we should advocate. Is there a hope for the future? I think there are some signs of possible class, let us say, fraternization between Hebrew Jewish workers and Palestinian workers. This is visible on a smaller scale in places in places where they are together employed. There is a great degree, surprising in the present circumstances, of solidarity on a class basis between Israeli Jews or Hebrew workers and Palestinian Arab workers who work in the same working site. There was also manifestations of solidarity of ordinary Israelis in 2011 during the big demonstrations that were worldwide, but during, especially in the Middle East region, in the Arab Spring, there was manifestations of great feeling of solidarity of ordinary Israelis with the great Egyptian working class and the Syrian masses. One of the most popular slogans, one of the most popular posters that appeared during the 2011 demonstrations in Tel Aviv was a simple 3-word poster: Mubarak, Assad, Netanyahu. I think this gives us some ground for modest hope for the future.
Thank you very much, Moshe. Absolutely brilliant. I find your argument very, very convincing, especially the idea that it's not possible to solve this issue under capitalism. Okay, I think for fairness, maybe Steve, you can have 5 minutes if you want to make 5 minutes, and then we don't have time for contributions from the floor. We should.
Okay. Well, I wasn't expecting this, Tina. So let me just let me get my thinking cap on. Do you want other people to come from the floor?
No, we don't have time. We either finish now or we finish.
I think to me, okay, the most important thing I think for me is the idea that the working class, the Israeli and Palestinian working class, that has to be the force for change. Now, of course, that doesn't mean to say we don't look at all the other countries around. We don't look at the working class all across the world. We're all connected together as a working class. But we have to have a perspective or thoughts for the Israeli and Palestinian working class. And the Israeli working class, I don't define them as being the Hebrew working class. 20% of them are Palestinians. So we should start talking about Israel having a minority. Part of its working class is Palestinian Arab. So we have to look to that to unite the working class, which Moshe just began to speak about, by the way. And I'll make the other point that it's the working class that is the only real democratic force, I would say, in the world. Two states ideology, I think, is not a democratic answer, because at the end of the day, it depends, as Adam said, on what America does. We will probably get a 2-state solution, it's possible, but it'll be UNRWA removed, Saudi Arabia's coming in, America, Israel. It'll be something quite reactionary. And the people who have illusions that it will be a democratic 2 states, no, it won't be. So the force for democracy has to come from the Palestinian people, from the Israeli people, from the working classes of both of these nations uniting. It may be that in the middle of this dark night, we cannot see the dawn, but there will come a time when the working class in the crisis, because we've never seen a crisis like this, will be forced by circumstances to come together, to unite together. And I think we will see that coming. So I'm optimistic. You know, I am optimistic, despite everything. Everything looks absolutely dire and terrible. But I think that I am optimistic that there will be change. And what Adam said to us about going out on the streets demonstrating, to me, was probably the most positive thing that I've heard so far, in a way, tonight, because that's the seeds of something else. And I'll just make this other point, because Tony made this point. When Tony dismissed the democratic movement that existed in Israel before the war about the constitutional court, of course it was very much Zionist. That's the first stage. The first stage of any democratic movement is going to bring all the prejudices to one spot and probably keep all the Arab people out of it as well. But if that movement's going to evolve, it will involve the Arab people of Israel. It will involve the Arab working class. And it will involve, it won't stay in that primitive first stage. It's going to come back again. But I tell you what, the crisis has been much deeper now after this war than it was even at the time when they were trying to get rid of Netanyahu. So I'm more optimistic, despite everything that we can. But democracy has to be central to the answer, because it's democracy which the masses of people want. The Palestinian people want democracy. The ordinary Israeli people want democracy, or a better one than they've got. And that's the big motive. And by the way, that doesn't contradict socialism. As Lenin explained too well, the only way to socialism is through democracy and the democratic revolution. He said that many, many times. So the fight for democracy is the fight for socialism in reality. I'll finish there, Tina.
Thank you very much, Steve. I thought it was a really good debate from the panel, and apologies for comrades not being able to come into the discussion, but I think it was quite important to let people speak at length and develop their argument, and I think it was a really good discussion. I also think that the working class in Britain and America in particular has a responsibility to stand up to what's happening, and we'll see tomorrow what's happened in Rochdale. I have many disagreements with George Galloway, many abortion, whatever, what socialism is, nationalism. He likes the USSR and admires the achievements of the USSR, etc., etc. But can you imagine one MP who has the guts in Parliament to stand up and speak in favor of solidarity with the Palestinians, against arms sales, against, the political cowardice of the labor rights, the Corbynite MPs in Parliament who do nothing to stand up for the Palestinians. So, despite my many disagreements with George Galloway, I think if he'd win in Rochdale, that would actually be a really a good thing for solidarity with the Palestinians. So with that, something to look forward to, perhaps, and we see you at demonstrations around the country in solidarity with the Palestinians and against, arms trades, etc. This was our last session in our series. It's been a really good series. I think we've had lots of people in the audience, up to 200, almost always over 100 people in the audience, and I hope we continue on that high level. We're going to start 2 new sessions, 2 new series next week. The Communist Culture Club, where we talk about culture in the broader sense of the word, with book reviews, etc., film reviews, theatre, but also bigger cultural questions. If you have any ideas for that, if you have any suggestions that you'd like to bring along, please get in touch, info@ymarx.com. And we're also starting a week later, so it's going to be a parallel 2 series, ABC of Marxism, with Ian Spencer. Looking very much forward to both of them. So hope to see you next Thursday. Good night. Thank you very much to the panel. Good night.